Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for being with us today. Today is our final session as we prepare for our end of year campaign time together as our Festival of Children Foundation cohort of organizations this year that we're working with. My name is Derek Feldman. I'll be with you for the next roughly 40 minutes or so. We'll go to the hour, of course, with all your questions. But today's discussion is around multi-channel campaigns. So what we're actually going to look at is how we plan, organize, and time between now and the end of the year. As you might suspect, all of these are actually being shown and recorded. So if you do forget anything, don't worry. You can head to the achieveguidance.com/FOCF to download the presentation, the recording, and anything else that you may need from it too as well. So in today's discussion, we are going to discuss the timeline and the strategies behind an end-of-year campaign, all sort of bunched together in a multi-channel campaign. As we go through today's discussion, I have provided to you in the handouts in your right-hand side, you will see there our handouts from today's presentation, as well as an end-of-year planning guide that you can download too, that I will also be discussing. All right, so let's go ahead and get started as usual. Just some quick reminders as we go through all of this information. It's good to sort of build upon where and what we've learned at before. So for instance, we've all talked about in our first sessions around donor behavior, all around how donors think and how they react and how they behave when it comes to solicitations and us asking them for money. A couple things to remember. Donors will never really experience most of your work. The vast majority of our donors live vicariously through your stories, through the solicitations, or through the marketing and awareness appeals that you set forward. And because of that, they're never in a position per se to witness the things firsthand. And so you have to become incredible storytellers, really writing on emotion and other kinds of things so that we persuade them in that instance from the moment that they actually get from the moment that they get that solicitation to the moment that they transact. We need to persuade them and emotionally pull them in to giving, of course. The other one is as we look here, is that donors don't read everything. As we've talked about with some of the messaging and other pieces that we had in sessions 2 and 3, we talked about how that some of our fundraising can be very repetitive. And in fact, we know that donors skim things, especially when it comes to direct mail. They don't fully read everything. And therefore, we do things like bolding and highlight different aspects. We use imagery to convey an emotion and a feeling of the beneficiary and what they need, of course. Also, because they don't read everything, it's our job to point things out. It's also our job to remind them consistently about the issue and the cause that they believe in, or they could potentially believe in, which, of course, is what you're working on. The other thing is that donors are busy and they forget about you. Oftentimes, as we understand from the first session and the third session, is that as we look at different aspects of donors, we realize that they forget they actually gave to you. They won't remember the organizations, the amount of money and different tactics that have been used on them to try and inspire them to give. And because of that, we know that our expectation needs to be lowered as well, meaning that we can't expect everybody to remember everything. We can't expect them to recall that even they gave to you every single time too. And so as we look at some solicitation work, it'll be important as we go through is that we spend time understanding that it is our donors that are guiding our behavior, of course, but at the same time, it's our donors that would need to be that constantly reminded. And then lastly, of course, as we've talked through at all of these sessions, is that you are much smarter than the average person that's out there. You know much more about the nonprofit field than ever before. And you also know so much when it comes to inspiring people to get involved in things. And because of that, you tend to be the outlier. You tend to be the person that you don't necessarily need to be recruiting money from because we're trying to get attention from the population that doesn't necessarily know too much about you. We're trying to get attention from a population that has just interacted with your organization for the first time. And then also, we're trying to get information and participation from a population that might just want to have arm's length away from being involved in the issue and cause. And because of that, you have to create things, we have to message certain things more generally, rather than being an insider and using some information and language. We talked about 4 magic words: community, impact, sustainable, and empower typically test very poorly when it comes to research and solicitation work, and therefore we'll use different types of imagery and so forth, as well as different types of illustrative language and writing to inspire the audience. And that's what I believe Hannah is helping you with, our copywriter, as she has talked with you about how to actually interview and talk to your beneficiaries, so that we can get the real story and talk in more detail about who they are, what they represent, the cause and effect you've had on them, and hopefully inspiring that individual to then give. So in today's discussion, we're going to talk about 2 major things over the course of the next 40 minutes. As we went through our reminder there, we're going to talk about the approach. There's an approach that's being used that typically does well, which is learn, act, give. And then after that approach, we're going to talk about how do we build a model for a multi-channel campaign, meaning that a time frame to raise money. What does a campaign look like? What are the planning aspects that need to go into that campaign, so that as we help you this year with yours, you can then take what we did with you, learn from that, and then also what this planning guide has for you is to start outline your next campaigns for next year. So as we go through each one of these areas, a couple things to keep in mind. First and foremost, I suspect that you may not be doing this kind of approach currently with your fundraising, and it will take time to shift over a little bit as well. And that as you look at some of the approaches that we discuss, is that the goal out of all of this, the complete goal out of shifting into a different type of model, is to overexpose, in a way, the potential donor to the issue that you're addressing prior to asking them for money. Our primary goal with that is, by exposing them more and more to the issue, making them more aware that when we do ask for resources, we're not trying to, in that one direct mail or in that one email, move them from an uninformed general population individual that is interested in helping others, but rather we give a somewhat educated population an idea of how their dollars can inspire change for an individual, because we've spent some time building awareness and education and knowledge around our issue with that population. It's really, really key. This is what has lent itself to what we would call successful acquisition strategies, because typically acquisition of donors is used in this manner currently by most organizations. We either build a list from our events and our activities and our friends and our family, and hopefully they've encountered us enough that they start to learn a little bit about us, and from that learning they then give. And in reality is that those contacts have actually don't know much about us. Even if you're putting them on a newsletter list, they're not actually doing things and learning. They're learning about activities that you might have, but it doesn't necessarily deepen the knowledge of who you are, what you represent, what you value, and necessarily where you're going. The other thing is that most organizations in their acquisition models tend to buy those lists, and when you buy a list, you really have an uninformed population that because they might have indicated somewhere that they have a propensity or an interest in or an affinity for the issue that you address, that they might be somewhat interested when they get your solicitation. And essentially this yields what's very common in our field, which is very low response rates to acquisition. The national average right now is about a 0.5% to 1.5% in direct mail solicitation when you buy a list. We as a field has become complacent with that, because that has been our method and model to raising support and donors overall. So our goal here is to try and inform and build awareness prior to soliciting. Now, as you build and inform and you build this awareness and you try to inspire somebody before acting, that you're going to start to notice that you need to be much more coordinated than ever before. So as we talk through Learn, Act, Give, which is essentially the approach, and as we get to a little bit later, I'm going to at least give you some guidelines as to think about what you should do in the months of September and October and November and December, all the way leading up to your giving as well. All right, so let's get into the approach. As I mentioned, the approach that we typically like to see is learning and acting and giving. If you recall from our previous sessions, we know that when donors understand fully, we know that they can give more, they can participate more, and it helps our retention. Very, very clear. When a donor is active in the learning and awareness building of being a part of some issue in its movement, we see them diving deeper and deeper to giving more of their assets rather than just time. We see them starting to build and give more of their money, and they start to begin to be an advocate for our work with others and their peers and their friends. That's essentially our goal of the most extreme involved individual that we would want in our mix. The model of Learn, Act, Give is based upon a couple things. So let's talk about learn first. In the learn category, what's in this category is our goal is to always educate donors about the issue in addition to the theme and concept of what our solicitation might be about. If you recall, we had I shared some examples with you about BOSMA, right? So BOSMA was the organization that was the visually impaired organization, or that helps visually impaired individuals. That was the organization that I highlighted their direct mail last session. So if you need to recall that, you can go there and see it. But BOSMA was really great about BOSMA's piece is that as you looked at BOSMA, their overarching goal in anything was to try and inspire them, try to inspire in that moment to learn that we know that jobs change everything. We know that if a person who is visually impaired and a person who has a job, if they have that one thing, they can be successful. So what they started to do is, and as we mentioned previous, what they started to have throughout the year is using that tag and that theme that jobs change everything. If you have a job, you're much more successful. You personally, donor, because of your job, you've been able to do the things that you've been able to do. You've been able to support the causes you've been able to do. You have the family and so forth, and it helps you as well. And so they used that theme throughout the year in all communications that went out. So when it started to become the time to start asking for money, we weren't departing from a concept or a theme. That theme of jobs change everything was everywhere. It was in an instance when it came up to their communications of newsletters. It also had to be something related to when they would do postcards and information packets. All of their pieces that year was all around the central theme of what they were trying to raise money for that year. And that central theme was around jobs change everything, help employ people who are blind. And what they really wanted to do is, as through that communication messages, do a couple important things during several months leading up to actually asking for money. One of the pieces that they used as an awareness builder is that they sent out a postcard to a population of people in their community. That postcard on one side had the concept theme that I was just talking about. Jobs change everything. On the other side of it, it had an infographic and graphic component that talked about how a job changes one person's life and how that one job can also change an individual who's visually impaired and why it's so important. It also had a call to action to go to the BOSMA website to see how a job can change everything in the term of a person who is blind or visually impaired. And if that individual knew anybody who is blind or visually impaired, to help them go to that site also to hopefully find a job or be a part of that. So they used this postcard send about 2 or 3 months outside, just right before the solicitation, to do two pieces. One is inform the general population about the concept of what they were doing. The second thing is make it programmatic. make it a call for anybody that received that. If you know somebody who's blind or visually impaired, to bring them to that site because that's an important piece of their work. And then third, it provided a basis for starting to communicate the brand of who they were right in front of that population that knew that they were going to get a solicitation in the coming months. So that was the first piece. So before asking for money, what they wanted to do was to help educate, and they also wanted to, what we would call, act. We wanted them to act in some way. They wanted to show some support by either telling friends who are blind or visually impaired to go to this site to find jobs, and or there were some other options that they could do too, is to get them in some way to internalize that the issue is important to them. Very, very key. In this awareness building, by the way, it had both a fundraising piece, a fundraising goal later on, as we'll talk about, but what it also had was an awareness and programmatic goal. In fact, the organization received a lot of referrals, in addition to sharing and other elements in the general population where they were sharing the story of people who had changed their jobs or changed their life because they had a job. It also had an opportunity for them to share some not only successful stories, but some employers who were also employing people who were visually impaired too as well. So the campaign, what we would call a knowledge campaign, this learning and acting campaign right before, inspired what would then come with really the solicitation later. So in a learn aspect, what we want to try and do is how do we get people to understand who we are, or at least the theme of what we're going to probably be raising money for later on. One way to look at that is to say, well, what's the story that we're going to use, and what's the fundamental program or service we're providing to that individual, and what is it about it that we provide that is very relevant to this population that we're about ready to ask for money. So in the case of Jobs Change Everything, what that did is that they used that tagline because it was relevant. And in fact, there was an email that said, do you remember your first job out of college? As most do, or most of us maybe regret that job, of course, or regret it. And so what that did is provide a reminder for them. And then that also provided the opportunity to talk more relevant about where the solicitation could go later on. So in terms of the learning, our goal is to start informing and putting forth that campaign concept and theme in terms of the program. In addition to that, getting them to act in some way, showing some support. Now, we know that the population as a whole won't necessarily act each and every time. We know that not everybody is going to go to the website or refer a friend to get a job who might be visually impaired. We knew that. But what we did have happen is that some people did act and took that extra step forward. And that call to action, that call or request to do something, again, really heightens their interest in the issue, which is really what we needed to have happen, right? So the other thing is that even if they didn't know somebody, they were asked to share a story of their job and use a hashtag or happen to share something relative to the campaign concept or theme that they thought was as important too. One of them was, share your job story. The other one was talk about the challenges you've had with jobs as well. And then those were all shared. And then individual stories of people who were visually impaired, their stories too were also shared in the same light. And so it was made it much more relevant for the donor and the general public as well as the individual beneficiary. We were highlighting both story of donor and beneficiary right in the same campaign. So that action, that expression is something that we really want to have happen right before we start getting individuals into the giving mode. One of the things that's worth asking yourself is, what could your donors and constituents do before you ask for money? What is the thing that they could do on behalf of the people you serve? And that could be volunteerism. That could be signing petitions. That could be sharing something. That could be just showing their support for what's going on. All of those things add value because essentially this is an audience that we want to inspire before we get them to the giving part. And this is where we can also use our engaged audience, our existing donors and volunteers and board members. What the beauty of that other campaign that I was talking about with Bosma is that they actually recruited board members, key volunteers who were very active with them, in addition to some of their beneficiaries, the people that are blind and visually impaired, to also be a participant in the campaign. They were the ones that were sharing their stories. They were the ones that were bringing it to their networks, and so they had a very clear opportunity to share that call to action with more and more of the general public. What we have seen at times is that organizations will try to do learning or awareness building campaigns, and most of those campaigns are targeted just for people who haven't responded to anything. But in fact, it's the persuasion of the population closest to us that will start to bring more and more people in to as well. So we're using the example like we've started here with Bosma. Each and every board member was given social media posts. Volunteers were giving those things. In addition, they were given language that they could use. They were asked to communicate and sit down or send emails to at least 5 or 6 individuals to talk about the Jobs Change Everything awareness campaign too as well. All of these kind of campaigns, all of this activity, in addition to the postcard mailing, in addition to they did some Facebook ads too as well, all of these things added value to heighten the organization. And what's interesting is that, by the way, most organizations were gearing up for just asking for money at the end of the year. This organization was building awareness prior to that solicitation. The last thing that this action happened, or the component that it had that was very, very successful, is it started to garner email addresses as well, which would be later used in the email campaigns for support. On the pages that Bosma had brought them to, they asked individuals if they wanted updates on Bosma jobs and careers, those kinds of things. So we started to accumulate emails that would be later used for solicitation purposes. So all in all, if you look at this action or bringing people for this call to action to do something in relationship to the larger theme of jobs change everything resulted in 3 major pieces before the solicitation went out. One is education and knowledge on the population that really didn't know much about them. The second thing, a call to action for that population to share or be a participant in the campaign in some way without giving money first, but rather giving their network or donating their voice or donating other aspects that were relevant to the campaign. And then third is that it got the constituents closest to them, there's key stakeholders like board members and volunteers who are highly engaged, to be very active in the campaign as well, which is very, very key. Those things really help to get us to where they were, which is part of the solicitation campaign. And as we mentioned, that's the last section, which is really the giving part. And in the giving part, this is where we want to create the solicitation based upon the larger theme, right? So the first direct mail that went out at the top, as you saw with that last piece that we shared in the last session, is, jobs change everything, help employ people who are blind, give now. And that aspect carried through, had very similar creative imagery that was used too as well. And it also was a fellow reminder. Now, the organization had additional resources and did ads in a local business journal. They also did ads on TV that were actually donated by local TV stations that were partners of theirs too as well. So all of those things added value. And as we look at it, we see that in addition to the awareness campaign and the ad pieces, it led them to a very successful campaign in the end. Because the solicitation was not the first time that they have been exposed to either the organization, its brand, or the concept theme of jobs change everything. All right, so now as we go through there, that's the model. And as you'll see, I'm going to embed that model into a multi-channel campaign. And specifically, I want to talk about end of year today. And you'll see how you can incorporate the Learn, Act, Give model over the courses of September through December. Now, obviously, September is over, but we'll have an opportunity to talk about what you can do right now in October and November to be successful. Before we get there, let's make sure and just cover what it means to have a multi-channel campaign. So when you hear that word, there's going to be a lot of different terminology that's being used, but essentially we're talking about a campaign as a time. And it's not a capital campaign, it's an annual fund or an annual appeal time that you're going out and using multiple tactics to try and raise money from donors and during a time frame. it's important to understand that the channels are just the different ways that we'll be soliciting, but a donor is a donor. And essentially what we're saying is that every donor is an individual and transact accordingly based upon impulse, where they are at that time, emotionally if they're drawn into the piece, and that whether that's through direct mail or even online and through email and so forth. All of those things add and contribute to the individual participating in the campaign in some way or manner. What's really important to understand too, though, is that we don't have direct mail donors that are being solicited for direct mail in our direct mail appeal in the fall. We have donors who will be solicited through direct mail and email and many other ways, even phone call. And those donors will be inspired at different points over the course of this time frame to try and give and support the organization. So don't look at it in the term of it's our multi-channel campaign and we only have direct, are we going to do this for our direct mail donors and so forth, because quite honestly, we have all different types of donors. And what we know from our behavior, if you recall from our last sessions, is that a donor doesn't transact exclusively in one way or the other. Although some may have a propensity to give, say, online at times, you could also inspire them offline at events to give in there. You can also inspire them through direct mail, as we know that individuals who gave online first and then gave in direct mail continue to give long-term through many different channels rather than just one way or the other. So in a multi-channel campaign, over the course of this time frame, we'll be using different tactics and approaches to try and garner their support. Typically, the options that you see are the ones that you'll see on your screen. So personal solicitation, phone, direct mail, email. If you had to look in order of success rates, it really follows the left all the way down to the right. So personal solicitation is by far the most, as it often is, followed by phone, direct mail, email, some sort of event, social media, and website. You have to recall that based upon our other design and question, or we had a session, I think it was session 3, our last session, where we talked about some design features in email and so forth, is that a lot of giving online is done in response to email solicitations, not necessarily just online and giving in websites. So because of that email solicitation, we know that that email is going to be a heightened piece for the online giver versus doing social media and so forth. In fact, social media fundraising is only 1% of overall online giving, a very low amount compared to email, which is 90% of all online giving, essentially, because we're drawing attention to the giving aspect by sending a solicitation to try and get them there. A couple things to remember. At the very least, we should be doing a direct mail and email sequence interspersed with social media mentions. Notice I didn't say solicitations, social media mentions, which means that we're going to be talking in social media about the stories that we're sharing. We're going to be talking in social media about the people that we're using in our solicitations, and not directly asking for money per se. And then the most successful ones, though, add a component to that, which is phone calling or some sort of events during the campaigns. In the Bosma campaign, they did have several events, private events, where board members would bring people together to talk about the concept of Jobs Change Everything, ask them for their year-end gift right there. They actually held an event privately in several homes where the board members would just bring everybody together and say, I didn't want to send you an email because I know you all are very busy. I just wanted to support this very nice cocktail hour for you at my home and tell you about the Jobs Change Everything initiative, and I'm hopeful that you can make your year-end contribution today, right now, and because we're not going to be sending you that direct mail because these were mid-level to major donors. All of those work really well. In addition to where we've seen very successful phone participation is looking at what we call our live bunts. So last year, but not this year, we look at those that have, during the campaign, not given yet, is that board members and volunteers were asked to make calls to, we consider these warm leads, is that they haven't responded to any of the solicitations this year. And so those phone calls to those past participants in our past year's campaign would receive a special phone call and a note about asking whether or not that they would support the campaign this year because they haven't received it and they haven't done it so. And so phone calling to ensure that those that supported last year do support this year has had great success during the months of December and in a little bit of November. But we usually look at that tactic to be used in the third to fourth week, the last couple weeks of the year, because then at that point we can ask for them to make an end of year gift before the year ends because they haven't responded yet to anything else that has been sent out. So successful organizations will use at a minimum the 3 direct mail, email, and social media mentions. Very successful organizations incorporate phone calling for live months, the last year but not this year's donors, and events privately for mid-level donors to major donors during the campaign timeframe. In terms of timing, because we get this question a lot around when should we send out this material and when should we be very proactive in getting our solicitations out there? Some want to try and get them out even earlier than normal. And the real challenge with that is kind of goes back to the first part that we started this as a reminder that most donors forget about this stuff and it's not going to be highly retained. And sending out an end of year direct mail piece that lands the second week of November is not, there's going to be too much time between that and the end of the year. You're probably going to get a gift, but it may not be it may not be an end of year type of gift. They might think you're out of cycle. So what we've seen is better timing where we coordinated a little bit closer to some holiday pieces that happen during that time. In addition is that the time and the approach needs to be more based on where the donor is rather than the organization's schedule. So for instance, when we look at life cycle or we look at the life cycle of a donor is time frame during this, we realize that the Thanksgiving time frame, the Christmas time frame tend to be in the December 31 time frame tend to be 3 very, very important dates that we need to a little bit avoid, but also be very cognizant in and around them very closely so that we have things land appropriately. We have had, in the past, even had a direct mail land the day after Thanksgiving. It didn't have as great as response as the ones that landed the Monday after. And so even small changes like that can help get a little bit of reaction. So now just think in terms of your own, is how did you time your end of year? Did you time it on your personal vacation or personal time off, or did you time it based upon when it's ideal for the donor? And obviously the answer is the others. In past campaign success that we have seen, the most successful campaigns have always allowed the direct mail to sit for about 4 weeks, for at least 4 full weeks in the donor's home or somewhere, followed with a sequence of up to 3 emails at the end of the year, and I'll talk about those in a minute, with an additional sequence of social media mentions that will occur over that time frame, followed with phone calling towards the end and events interspersed. All of that together yields a very successful end of year fundraising. And success not only in terms of direct mail response overall, but also overall giving from the campaign. We have seen it that events that even though a donor may have received a direct mail, even though it shouldn't have been happening, but even if they had received a direct mail, but that they're giving in an offline mode like the event or phone call, all of it persuaded that individual. And so the success of looking at the donor as an individual and trying to get them to give through multiple means has been very supportive. And in fact, some donors even contribute more than once. As we look at the Learn, Act, Give model, here's kind of where we want to try and get things to happen. We would love to start sending stuff out about who you are and some awareness building pieces in the month of November, maybe even to take an action around the Thanksgiving timeframe. Here's a way that you can show your thanks by making this note or sharing this piece, or we just want to say a big thank you to you, and so this, because of that, we set up this one page to show and recognize all of the donors and your contributions, and so visit this page. So act in some way, taking an action, all the way to the giving pieces. As you see with the giving areas here, you'll notice that the direct mail should be sent roughly right before Thanksgiving in order for it to land, especially if you're doing nonprofit rate, on that Monday right after. Followed with the December 1st being Giving Tuesday. Depends if you're participating, but we do like some of the campaigns to launch on that Giving Tuesday because there's going to be heightened interest in an area around participatory giving that day. And on December 1st being Giving Tuesday, that's a great time to introduce the campaign theme to those that haven't given yet through the direct mail, which they just got, but also to be introduced to the campaign theme on a day that's really inspired for giving. Then sending up a second email on the 17th-ish, around there, and then followed up by a December 31 email. If you're doing more than 3 emails, it'd be very challenging given the truncated time frame. And quite honestly, most organizations don't need that unless you're like in the environmental space. So there's other things that happen to the organization over the course of that time frame too. The first email is usually about the campaign theme. It's a very strong email that opens up, describes the campaign theme in a giving sense, and inspires them to impulsively give right there. There's a statement of relevance at the top. Hannah's probably talked to you about that, and we mentioned that in sessions 2 and 3, that relevant donor statement, like, do you remember your first job out of college? Those are all relevant statements that can be used. In terms of the 17th email, those are usually done from a different vantage point. That's the vantage point where, if we're talking about the beneficiary, we might just talk about it from the mother's point of view or the grandmother's point of view, rather than from that individual's point of view. So a different way to cover the story as well. And then usually, if you do have a match or you have some other leverage part, we like to start to introduce that into this on the 17th. If you have it available, we can introduce it on the first, the email on the first. But we see that there might be more inspiration when it comes after the 17th, because the first would have heightened information around Giving Tuesday as well. So therefore, we can really utilize that match mid-campaign to really inspire people. That's also a time when matches can come in for phone call and events to really inspire people too. So I highly encourage you to see if you can get a match. If you can, use those for both online and offline tactics to raise money. Like in your phone calling, you could call your past donors who haven't given in the months of in the campaign, in the month of December so far, and you can say to them, "Well, I want to let you know that we actually, we haven't. We noticed that you hadn't supported this year, and I want to also let you know that we have a donor that has graciously come forward to match anybody's dollars in the campaign. So if you're able to contribute again this year, that would mean double for our organization." Those are all things that can be used in full calling and offline approaches. And lastly, the email on December the 31st really needs to be about just giving to the organization because it's the last day. We typically will use some maybe imagery from the campaign, but the pure focus of that day is going to be on making a last-ditch effort to get the individual to give. So let's look at the different months that we might do our different Learn, Act, Give models, things to think about in general. We call September really what we like to say here is the creative month. The creative month is an opportunity to start creating what we think we're going to talk about in the campaign if you don't know it already. And in that month, we're going to start to identify the one person, because we know that people, not crowds, raise money, right? We're going to think about how we can connect that individual giver to that person. So we're starting to create the storyline and starting to ensure that the individual that we have, the beneficiary, is relevant to the individual giver, and the giver can be the hero. Excuse me. And as we see here, we start to really get a sense of that this message is something that we can address. The message of the campaign can be easily addressed and easily understood through writing and imagery. And this is where, through the months of September, we can start to begin to maybe look at testing certain things too. So one of the suggestions we always have is that during the month of September, start to take a ton of pictures of the beneficiary you might highlight. Several different different people. As Hannah had mentioned in our calls, it's always kind of good to get several different stories and angles. So start thinking right now about, well, who it is that we might want to, start covering, and maybe we can start interviewing them and start positioning them internally through storyboards, whether or not these are the types of individuals we want to use, and the theme, does it relate to the overarching theme as well? So during the month of December is a time to be creative, we like to say, is interview several beneficiaries, people that you're helping, interview their families, and start to get a good sense of what are the two major stories that we could talk about, who are the people that are in and around those stories, what are the images that we could use to illustrate the cause and effect we have on that individual as well. Here's some key dates. I'm going to break it down in weeks. One is visit with people. Two is look at past solicitations if you can, just to make sure everything's all right in this month of December. And storyboard themes means that you would actually create a story for each, and then choose a narrative and story for the campaign. This is a great time to go out to people you don't know and say, we've got two stories here. Which of these two stories do you like the most? Another way to do it too is even do a survey monkey, send it out to several of your key donors, maybe several of your board members, several of your key volunteers, and say, these are the two stories that we might be using, and here's the campaign theme, and get their feedback on each one of those. So use the month of September to start building those pieces. In the month of October, we call this our planning month. This is a time and opportunity to start planning what we're going to do and what the logistics time frame is for the end of the year. As we've talked through a lot of the things to remember here, we have all these different types of donors. We need to start understanding, well, how are we going to take the story we've now selected and start to get it out there for people to see it? When are we going to start talking about it? How will we use certain key people to help make that possible? And how can we extend that narrative across multiple solicitations rather than just using something in direct mail? So a couple things to do then during the month of October as we plan for everything. Create a planning time frame, which would mean that let the whole staff and board and volunteers know that this is exactly when campaigns will come out. Here's the story, and here's the angles of those stories. During this time, create the donation pages that have the images that you would use in the campaigns, of course, and your social media post schedule. Let everybody know when you're going to have these discussions online, so that your key constituents and stakeholders can also be active participants. Very important piece is, don't let this completely be staff driven. Allow those campaigns and key stakeholders and volunteers to be active participants in the discussion of each one of the types of outlets of the campaign channel. So for instance, if you're going to do some social media posts, this is a great time to ask your key volunteers to also like it, to share it, to do their certain things too. Some key dates. One is present a timeline in the story and logistics to the staff if you can, and some of the key pieces. I would start to get the online donation pages going in the imagery, of course. We always say wireframes, and we mentioned this in our last piece. Start to make sure that that you're starting to draw out or get a sense of how do you really want the pieces to start to look like, and maybe that's something that you can work together as a team to make sure that you have those images that you would need. And then lastly, it's always good to check what your sites will start to look like in mobile and start to play around with things, because then you can determine in October, at least, if there's any technology issues that need to be addressed. In November, this we call the learning month. So this is where you start to get into Learn, Act, Give, right? So remember, the act is a reinforcement of the interest. So as much as we could start to learn or get them to do things during this month would be really great. Always start out most messaging, obviously, with the thank you for being supporters of the issue rather than the organization or what's been going on. So we have seen everything from postcard sends of thanking donors for their past contributions. And by the way, don't be surprised if you get somebody to give to that, because they just do. We've seen that happen multiple times. We've done these. We'll send thank you cards out to all donors for their gifts, and that in the coming months, you're going to hear another, here's the family you've helped in the last year. This is what the difference has been made. And in the coming weeks, you're going to hear of another family that needs your help. Until then, thank you for being such a great concerned donor, blah, blah, blah. So all of those things help to expose the individual to where we're going. when we mentioned the learning series, these can be a sequence of emails that you can send in November. Maybe once a month or once a week, or not once a month, maybe once a week or every other week, send an email that talks about, this is who we are and this is the issue that we're addressing and this is the big thing to learn and this is how you have played an important role. That is also part of that Thanksgiving a day too. And as we look at this sort of timeline, is send a message, ask donors to act or do something. Maybe in light of Thanksgiving, ask them to share this as this is sharing month, or ask people to thank donors for their contributions in a way. Help them see things, some images of people that you've helped or inspired over the course of the last 11 to 12 months. And then finally, of course, we have our December, the giving month. And in December, of course, all of our solicitations that will go out, presumably we're going to participate in Giving Tuesday in some way, just recognition that that's the day. We talked about the campaign always launches with our direct mail roughly right after that Thanksgiving timeframe, with up to 3 emails followed after that. Remember, what's really key is that last bullet point, which is we need to suppress donors from future solicitations. So if they have given already, let's not start continuing to send them emails about becoming a donor too. It's time to suppress them. So every week, make sure that you take individuals out before you send those other emails. Also, start to send some handwritten notes to thank, a couple days before Giving Tuesday for being remarkable. Do some unique, small, personalized things. Incorporating volunteers into those to help you complete those is really good. Time the emails to kind of go out late and mid-morning-ish. That's the best ideal time. At least 2 emails. If you send at least 2 emails a week and a half apart, you're probably going to be pretty good. And then, as I mentioned, the calling component, I couldn't say how much that strategy alone really brings in dollars that has been there in the past, and to ensure that those are all there in the future. So as we look at that, that's something to kind of do very, very successfully. All right, so here's your key dates. As you see, as we mentioned this in the past, we had all these key dates as we were going there. So Giving Tuesday, the first email solicitation, calling past donors roughly in the week 3, and then that final reminder, the 31st. One of the key things is to get those volunteers to hopefully call the last couple weeks over the December timeframe. Now, I have had organizations say, well, that seems like it's Christmas and it's end of year, we don't want to bother them. Very, very true. What we would want to do is although that seems like a busy time, it does still have we'd still see high response rates. You could also, if you also wanted to, you could start it earlier, and the positioning of the phone call would be, we just want to ask that as you receive these that you respond to it. It could be more of a call to update rather than a call to just give or why they haven't given right now. So just change the message that you would have in it. All right, so that kind of leads us to a couple pieces here as we end. Of course, if you have any few questions, let us know. But I know that our team and Natalie has all been in touch, and we're answering all those and getting those campaigns ready for you. One is that check the handout section in here and GoToWebinar in your panel right here. You can get this presentation and also the end of your planning guide. That planning guide has each one of these months, all of these steps in it that I talked about. That's what you'll be using going forward. And so when we depart with you and after January, we're going to be talking with you about how you carry through what you've learned and how you can use the planning guide for your next campaign. Try and get people to do things before you get them to give. Very, very key. Getting people to act before giving inspires them and internalizes the issue. If we're just going to hit people up first by giving and not try to inform them or help to educate them, thanking them, all of these things around the Thanksgiving timeframe that we talked about, all of these things in the month of November, those things are done in order to inspire somebody to give emotionally when it's time and when we have those calls to action. Lastly, I would say is as you talk with Natalie and Jeremy and our team, talk through maybe what are some things that you can do during the month of November. I realize right now we've got another month and a half of that, is maybe what are some pieces you can add into your newsletter that would help educate. The second thing is what are some actions that we can ask people to do around Thanksgiving? Bring those conversations up. Jeremy will be reaching out to you to have a discussion right after this, and we can brainstorm together with you too as well. All right, so as we depart here today, we always like to get you out a couple minutes early, 5 or 6 minutes now on the clock as it tells me. We want to make sure that you know that to go to the achieveguidance.com/FOCF/FOCF. There you'll be able to get not only the copies of today, but also you can get a recording of this too. Natalie will be reaching out again. I know that you guys are in the middle of your campaign planning time with each one of us. And then the other really good thing is that all of the organizations that are part of FOCF that are going through the same project together, we will be in January bringing you all back together to talk about how the campaigns worked, what organizations used, what was their theme, what was their concepts, what were the things that they had. And we'll be compiling all of that together so you can learn some things that were successful too as well. So looking forward to that time together. Thank you so much for your time today. I know it's a busy day for you, I'm sure, but thanks for your attention, and let me know if you have anything that you need from us, and we'll be in touch very soon. All right, take care. Bye-bye.